Hi, my name is Samantha Del Zario, and this is my Week 5 presentation. This week we're going to be talking about the Marbury versus Madison case. The Marbury versus Madison case was a very significant case. In 1787, the Constitution was signed and held some important principles, such as separation of powers and checks and balances. This case also brought the first check and balances issue to the Supreme Court, and it also solidified the Supreme Court's power to interpret the Constitution. When the Constitution was brought into play, these were our three branches of government. We have the legislative branch, which makes the laws, the executive branch, which signs the laws, and the judicial branch, which decides if the laws are constitutional. The judicial branch is most important because it just makes sure that the other two are following the Constitution. So before we get into the case, I'm just going to talk a little bit of what led up to it. So the election of 1800 was between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Thomas Jefferson ended up defeating John Adams in the presidential election. And before Adams left office, he appointed a handful of judges for his Federalist Party, which was approved by the Senate and was signed by Adams himself. Before these judges were able to take office, they needed to go through one last step, which was a commission. A commission is basically a statement written on paper that states that this is their job and they can start working. These commissions took longer than expected, and when Thomas Jefferson took office in 1801, he had James Madison keep these from being delivered. One of the judges, William Marbury, did not like this because he wanted to start his job, and he brought the case to the Supreme Court. The main issue with this case was the court declared an act of Congress unconditional, which ended up establishing the doctrine of judicial review. Marbury wanted the courts to issue a writ of mandamus, which is basically a court order, and in 1803, John Marshall, who was appointed by John Adams himself, ruled on the case. He ruled that Marbury had the right to receive his commission and that he also had the right to remedy, and lastly, which was the most important ruling, he ruled that the Supreme Court did not have the power to make Madison hand over Marbury's commission. The important aspects of this case was in making this ruling, Marshall had the court rule over itself and brought up the Judiciary Act of 1789. This was a law that gave the Supreme Court the power to rule in cases just like this, but Marshall believed that Section 13 violated the Constitution, and Marshall stated that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Whenever Congress and the Constitution were in conflict, the Supreme Court would turn to the Constitution for guidance, aka the judicial review, which is an important function because this case was the first to apply this principle. This case impacts us today because it was a landmark decision under John Marshall, which established the power of the judicial branch. It also allowed the principle of the Supreme Court to declare an act of Congress if it is inconsistent with the Constitution. So that is it for my Week 5 presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed.